Welcome back everyone to Gotcha Interact. We'll be taking a look at the first half of the Natlan 5.0 banners today. The first character we're going to be looking at is Mualani, and the other character on the other side of the banner is going to be Kazuha. Let's go through both these banners and see whether or not these characters are a good pulling option for you.
And if you do enjoy the video, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button and check out the rest of our channel for other videos you may be interested in. Also, we do have a Discord that you can join. It's a link in the description, so do check it out. We have a lot of fun talking in there. Now, onto the video.
Like we stated, the first character we're going to be talking about is Mualani. Now, if you want to know a little bit more beyond kind of the surface level that I'm about to go over in about 30 seconds, you guys can go ahead and check out her pre-release where we go a lot more in depth on what her kit actually states and how that's actually going to change, and possibly look at what she's going to be doing in the future when she releases. Looking at her once again in kind of a very brief moment about what she does. Like most Natlan characters, she's going to be jumping into her Night Soul Blessing state, and how she's going to do that is by using her skill. She's then going to be getting a maximum amount of Night Soul points, and then over time she's going to be depleting or consuming these Night Soul points over time while she's in this state. Alongside of that, while her movement speed and interruption resistance is increased, you're going to be marking certain enemies as you basically come into contact with them with the idea of marked as prey. Alongside of this, on top of that as well, you're going to be then going ahead and hitting them with normal attacks to do a bunch of damage based on Mualani's max HP. This is the major idea with how her kit's going to work, and we've seen this a lot with a lot of Hydro characters, is going ahead and using HP to actually turn it into damage. And looking at the past and looking at Hydro characters or even HP characters that scale into that, they do a lot of damage in general. So I think a lot of people are very excited to see what Mualani can do even as a 5.0 character.
I know that I, for one, am excited to see how Mualani can work and all the teams that will come out of that. But now, looking at Kazuha, the other character on the banner. Now, as most players know, Kazuha has been a staple character for a very long time, one of the best supports in the game, and there's plenty of reasons why. And so let's talk about that. Maybe you're a new player, or you're coming back to Natlan because it's been a while and you want to see what's up. So looking briefly at Kazuha, his team function, we know he's an Animo character and he fits in the team as a support. He's one of the best in the game, like I stated, and when looking at his skills and normal attack and stuff like that, there's nothing too crazy about the normal attack, but just note that he does do a plunging attack in it, so if you are looking for some damage, it is still worth to level. Looking at his skill, he basically just goes up into the air doing some Animo damage, and there's actually a tap and a hold version of this. You can do the hold version to get a little bit more AoE and also do a little bit more damage, and the main reason it's good, and this is why Kazuha is good, is because he can swirl these other elements, and so it makes him a staple user for Viridescent Venera. But also within his own kit, in his passive talents, he will increase your Hydro, Pyro, or Cryo, or Electro damage when absorbing the element and causing a swirl reaction. Part of his kit, and this is called Poetics of Fubutsu, is that he'll grant whatever element that he swirled an elemental damage bonus based on his elemental mastery for 8 seconds. And this stacks on top of his ability to also utilize Viridescent Venera. So this is why he's such a great character in the game, and that he's just really, anytime he comes on a banner, he's usually like, you can't go wrong with pulling him. He's gonna be a good character. And then looking at his burst real quick, you can use it to swirl if you're not using the skill, or if it's on cooldown, but the burst can be off field and has some nice damage, and can be useful for some teams where you actually want to get an infusion with the burst, like if it grabs Bennett's burst and gets Pyro for some Hydro characters, which who knows, that could actually be really good for Mualani, so it has some nice uses there.
With a new region around the corner and waifus popping up seemingly in every single version, no one can really blame you for going to the shop, but each of those prices looks a little bit too high for my liking. That's where today's sponsor, Loot Bar, comes in. Loot Bar is a service that allows you to top up on Genesis crystals for a cheaper price than you see in-game. Loot Bar is easy to use, free to use, and most importantly, safe to use because all you need is your UID. No emails or passwords are needed. And with almost 3,000 reviews, Loot Bar boasts plenty of positive reviews and also offers 24/7 live support that I've personally used myself and am pleasantly pleased with. Not only do they help you save for Genshin, but Star Rail as well. After completing a purchase, Loot Bar promises a maximum 30-minute wait time for delivery, but we've even gotten our crystals even sooner. They've also proven themselves trustworthy through other content creators like Jello Impact, Dukaja, Superatom, Mujin, and Teva Times. Use the link down in the description to download Loot Bar and start saving today. Thanks again to Loot Bar for sponsoring this video, and now back to the video. Now jumping over to the weapon side of these banners, looking at Surf's Up, looking at Mualani's weapon, this specific weapon obviously has a catalyst. At level 90, we're going to be getting 88.2% crit damage, so much higher on the crit damage route, very much actually similar to what we see in the catalyst that Neuvillette gets. Also a lower base attack, considering everything that she's doing is going to be based off that max HP. So, looking at this, the ability for the refinement stated at R1, it states that it increases max HP by 20%. Once every 15 seconds, for the 14 seconds after using the elemental skill, you will gain 4 Scorching Summer stacks. Each stack increases normal attack damage by 12%. For the duration of this effect, once every 1.5 seconds, you lose 1 stack after a normal attack hits an opponent. Once every 1.5 seconds, gain 1 stack after triggering a Vaporize reaction on an opponent, and you can once again get a maximum of 4 Scorching Summer stacks at one time. So the idea here basically is to get these stacks, and this is why we're actually seeing a lot with a lot of these weapons coming out with kind of being very specific to the character. We're seeing less and less weapons like Staff of Homa, Primordial Jadewing Spear, Aqua Simulacra, that even with the abilities, they can be helpful. Now they're just kind of being straight up stat sticks to other characters. The abilities now very heavily are getting thrown onto the characters that they're specifically with, which we're very glad about, but we're seeing a lot less of the ability to throw these on 4-star characters or something like that. So looking at this weapon, obviously with the low amount of normal attacks that you can do with Mualani, or you can probably do them more often, but once again, you want to put that mark on the enemy first and then do a normal attack. This Nevermind helps with Vaporize reactions to get those stacks back, but you're constantly losing those stacks by doing normal attacks. So if the normal attacker that you're putting this weapon on hits too fast, then once again, you're going to see that a lot of these stacks are going to get thrown away. So once again, I think it's just these specific 5-star weapons are getting more and more focused on specifically the characters they're with. So if you're going to be going for this weapon, obviously Mualani's probably the only one I would throw to. If you accidentally get this by going for Kazuha's weapon, which Rift's going to talk about in a second, then this would be a great one. But going ahead and talking about Kazuha's weapon, Rift, what can you say about it?
Yeah, so looking at Freedom Sworn, it's a pretty good sword. I actually do have it myself, and it is a Elemental Mastery main stat sword. You can get 198 Elemental Mastery when this is level 90, so it's really good for Kazuha because he wants to ultimately reach 1,000 Elemental Mastery to make the maximum out of his kit. But the thing is, if you're already getting that with a 4-star like Iron Sting, there's actually several Elemental Mastery swords you can utilize, then obviously he doesn't really need his weapon. He's just one of those characters. He can get away with actually so many 4-stars, even if it's not an Elemental Mastery 4-star. Like a lot of people will just use Favonius for the particles for himself, but also for the team. And so even that's just a good option. He's a very good character to use who doesn't actually need his weapon. And so ultimately, if you're new to the game, and especially if you're free to play, I would say stay away. But for those of you who are curious about this sword and kind of want to make your Kazuha a little bit better than usual, let's look at the ability, assuming it's Refinement 1. So looking at the ability, it states that it will increase damage by 10% just right off the bat. And when the character wielding the weapon triggers a reaction, they will gain a Sigil of Rebellion. This effect can be triggered once every 0.5 seconds and can be triggered even if that character is not on field. Now, when you get 2 of these sigils, all of them will be consumed, and then all of your party members will obtain Millennial Movement Song of Resistance for 12 seconds. Now, this effect will increase normal, charged, and plunging attack damage by 16% and increase attack by 20%. And then once it's triggered, you can't gain any more sigils for 20 seconds. Of all of the many effects of Millennial Movement, buffs of the same type will not stack. So do note that if you have 2 sword users on your team using this weapon, or even a different character that's using another weapon that has Millennial Movement buffs on it, they can actually stack with each other. One thing that is to note, basically the effect lasts for 12 seconds, and then you can't get any more sigils for 20. So there's an 8-second downtime with this, which isn't terrible, but it is nice to see some normal or charge attack damage increase, as well as plunging attack damage increase, and also just some attack increase. So it kind of does make up for not being ridiculously good in terms of the main stat, just because Kazuha can use other things like I was saying. But I have actually noticed certain differences in certain teams that I do run Kazuha in, where I can actually tell, wait, my catching is actually doing a lot more damage, and even my Nahida and like an aggravate team or something, where I actually do use Kazuha to increase the electro damage of the team. And I can notice that my normals and charge are higher, and also the attack is higher for everyone, which all of those characters like a lot. So it's a good weapon, but it's ultimately not one I would recommend pulling for, even if you do have the character. And we'll talk about the weapon banner a little bit more later on to ultimately decide, is it actually okay pulling on?
Looking at that summary section that Rift was just talking about, let's go ahead and jump into our questions. And the first question is, do you need either character on your account? Basically looking at, is the character actually worth the pull? What elements or roles do you actually need for your specific account? Who else do you need to fill that role? Is there anyone else that already fills the role? So why pull the character? So kind of this is going to help us a little bit more focus on, should you actually be getting this character right now? Now, once again, that first question of, is that either character really, do you really need it? Is it really necessary to pull? Looking at Mualani, I think as we get into Natlin, as well as a lot of puzzle stuff and exploration, I know a lot of people are going to be very excited and very happy to be using Mualani. And, we're probably going to get tons of people being like, you should get Mualani purely because of just the availability to get move around Natlin. And I know that that's a great part, but once again, that's going to fade over time. As we're going to get more characters with, other than Mualani, we need to figure out more or less, is the character herself going to kind of stand the test of time? And looking at everything that she does, she's got some great multipliers. And I know if you were kind of keeping up with a lot of the beta and whatnot, or if you kind of look at a lot of things about speculation of what she could possibly be doing, a lot of people weren't very happy maybe with her damage initially, but it looks like some of it and maybe all of it kind of got evened out. So she still looks like a very good character. And the question kind of that's been since the beginning is she going to be worth it to kind of take out Neuvillette? And so that's the first thing I kind of want to go over is, in general, I think that if you have Neuvillette, there's really zero reason to be pulling Mualani. As much as she is a great character, she can have a lot of buffs and everything. If you want to and you are just like, you know what, I don't even care, I'm going to pull her, go ahead, that's great. And honestly, it's not like she's going to be a detriment to your account. She's going to be a great buff for you, and it's going to be very easy to build a team around her. Neuvillette is a little bit less focused on vaporized teams because of his high hydro application, whereas Mualani, it seems like with her less application, and even with her weapon kind of showing you use vaporize, then we kind of see that, she can kind of take over those reins a little bit. So maybe she's comparable more to someone like Ayato and Child. Does it really matter which one you should go for on that front? So in my personal opinion, from what I'm seeing here, I think that she's going to be doing more damage than someone like Ayato and Child. So if you're trying to think of an upgrade for them, I definitely think that that's very high in the possibility to get. Never mind, keep in mind that we're also going to get Mavuika or the Pyro Archon in the future, so there might be some good usability there. Now, also, I do think the biggest thing also when jumping over to the other side of the banner is looking at Kazuha. That definitely depends on kind of pulling factor on looking at both these characters. Yes, Kazuha is a great character. I want to put that out right now. I would not get rid of my Kazuha at the end. Any part of the day, any day of the week, I would keep him. But just keep in mind that characters like Venti, Sucrose, Jean, Shanyun, a lot of Animo characters and most likely future Animo characters are probably still going to be, supportive and can use the Viridescent skill. Now, he is one of the best at just buffing. Once again, Rift went over that huge elemental damage boost that he can do. Never mind his weapon buffs that he can give. He's just a great character and he's very easy to build. And I think that does take away from, pulling Mualani. A lot of people are going to be looking at, do I pull Kazuha or Mualani? I think Kazuha is a more supportive character and one of the best in the game. So that really does tend to pull away from, should you actually be pulling the DPS, a new DPS basically, or should you be pulling one of the goated supports? So once again, looking at these two, I think Mualani is a great pull. But if you already have maybe a lot of Vaporize on your account, even if it's a Pyro DPS that's focused on Vaporize, maybe look at somebody else to pull for, maybe save a little bit. Kazuha, on the other hand, if you're like, well, I'm getting everything that I need out of other characters with Kazuha, I'll be fine, and I don't really need to be pulling him, then that's great as well. But I do think out of the two characters, who's more necessary on most people's accounts is probably going to be Kazuha.
Next, let's ask the question, what kinds of teams are you trying to build? And I actually like, Vixen, how you brought up Neuvillette, because that is a lot of the competition right now that people are trying to compare with when it comes to Mualani. And that makes sense because it's the latest Hydra DPS, and here we are getting a new one. But like you stated, the main difference is that Neuvillette doesn't really go into the Vaporized teams, whereas Mualani, it looks like she's really encouraging that. So I did like how you brought that up. And so, of course, if you are pulling Mualani, Bennett, Xiangling is probably going to be a dynamic duo. You mentioned the Pyro Archon or Mavuika coming out later. There's definitely some easy teams I think you can build. I think ultimately her teams are going to be pretty simple. just because of the existence of Bennett, right? And he's just a goated character. He's never gotten worse. He's only gotten better over time. So I don't think we'll be putting him down anytime soon. But who knows, maybe the Archon can change that. So obviously with Mualani, it's vaporized teams. But looking at Kazuha, Kazuha is the very flexible one here. And that, makes some a little bit more obvious sense as Mualani's a DPS and Kazuha is more of a support. Kazuha is going to go in a lot of different teams. Virtually any team that's doing any one of the core 4 elements, being Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, and Electro, especially in mono teams, Kazuha is kind of the one you would go to over any character. He's just the best in slot for something like that. And so while being able to do that, but also have a little bit of a touch of damage if you do level the talents a little bit, he's an awesome character. You really can't go wrong with him. Like, it's not a waste of Prima Gems. Even if you don't have a Hydro DPS and you're thinking about Mualani and end up getting Kazuha, you're still not walking away losing anything, because Kazuha is just so good. Like, that's all there is to it. And so there's a lot of different teams you're going to do with that. Obviously, he's not going to be great for Geo teams, physical teams. I think it kind of goes, he's pretty straightforward. It's with the swirlable elements, and you can even do some aggravate teams. If you're using a Sino aggravate, then Kazuha can still be used for something like that, because you would use double Electro, maybe like Sino Official or even Sino Beto, use Kazuha, and then just your one Dendro would be Nahida, and that's a goated team in and of itself. And Sino's going to deal a lot of good Electro damage.
Now looking at our last question, looking at do you need the weapons? Keeping this pretty brief, I mean, we already kind of went over, kind of beat it to death almost, these weapons. Once again, I think I'm just going to bring this in a very specific sense. Mualani's weapon, very specific for Mualani. Don't pull it if you don't have her. It's too specific. It's a great stat stick, kind of like Aqua Simulacra for other characters, but honestly, if you happen to accidentally get it, it can definitely be used on other characters. For instance, Neuvillette or somebody like that, a Catalyst user that just wants a bunch of crit damage. But looking at Freedom Sworn, on the other hand, this weapon, although it is very useful for probably more than one character, it can definitely be used on some 4-stars as well. Riff talked about, though, even if you have Kazuha and okay, well, I have Kazuha, I should get his weapon, right? Not necessarily. There's a lot of good 4-star weapons for him, especially ones that help with energy recharge, personal damage. He's got a lot of ones that already help him already a lot with 4-star weapons, so it might be worth it to either save those primos for other characters or save them for other weapons for specifically like DPS characters or support characters that really, really like their weapon.
Yeah, exactly. Right on. And one thing I would add to that, especially with seeing the change in the fate points being from 2 now to 1, with it being a lot easier to not have to build, pity twice, essentially, for a weapon, and just making it easier, I think, if people pulling Mualani really want the weapon, then yeah, it's going to be worth it, and I would go for it. But that's the only scenario that I can see the weapon banner actually being worth. Kazuha never really needs his weapon, ever. I'm just going to say that. He just doesn't. So you're not on the weapon banner for Kazuha's weapon in any scenario, in my opinion. You're only on there for Mualani's, and obviously if you're not pulling Mualani, stay away from the weapon banner. That's just my opinion. But now let's talk about weighing the dangers between some, free-to-play players all the way up to those whale players, and talk about constellations. So if you're free-to-play, this isn't maybe a section that's you think about too often, but when it comes to DPS characters, it is quite popular to look at the C1 and the C2. And really, that's what we're going to do here with Mualani, starting with her, and decide, is she worth that C0? Can she just stay there? Or is her C1 one of those first constellations that are just absolutely insane and pivotal to making the character basically twice as good? So let's look at Mualani's first constellation. It states that the damage dealt by the first Sharky Surging Bite after Mualani enters the Night Soul Blessing state and the shark missiles it triggers will be increased by 66% of Mualani's max HP, and that's absolutely insane. This instance of increased damage is subject to the diminishing damage rules of Surfshark Wave Breaker, and if you don't know about those, I would highly recommend checking out our pre-release because we do talk about that. Also, it's not over yet. In addition, while you're out of combat, Mualani's Night Soul Blessing state consumes 30% less Phlogiston and Night Soul points. So that's kind of just a nice cherry on top. It doesn't actually help combat. Looking at her second constellation, Mualani will gain 2 of the Surfshark Wavebreaker's Wave Momentum stacks when she enters Night Soul's Blessing. She will also gain 1 stack when obtaining a Puffer. In addition, whenever Mualani obtains 2 Puffers within a single instance of the Night Soul's Blessing state, she will recover an additional 12 Night Soul points over 2 seconds. This effect requires the passive talent, Heat Resistant Freshwater Puffer, to be unlocked first. So when looking at both of these constellations, I mean, it's kind of obvious to me, this first constellation is definitely pretty powerful, and it's a very, very significant damage increase to Mualani. So if that is something you are looking for and you really want to see a lot of good performance out of your Mualani, you really can't go wrong. And I think it's pretty good value to go after the C1. But is it necessary? And honestly, I don't really think so. Usually, if you build a good team, then your Mualani should be outputting enough damage even at C0.
Now talking about Kazuha and looking at his constellations, I actually already have him at C1, and I've been tempted many times to get his C2, as it is one of the biggest constellations for a character in basically the entire game. And looking overall at him as a character, I think looking at him at C0 though, I think he's perfectly fine at C0. So if anybody's looking at, do I have to get, Kazuha at, C2, I really think it's a huge jump from C0 to C2 that I don't really feel like is necessary. If you find yourself in my position where you're at C1, then I think going for C2 is worth it. But honestly, I think it's almost a weird gap at C1 that's not really worth it. Looking at Scarlet Hills, his first constellation, it states that it decreases his skill's cooldown by 10%. And using Kazuha Slash, his burst, resets the cooldown of his skill. So it allows you to use your skill a little bit more often, basically skill burst skill. That's very nice, but honestly, not a constellation that's really worth it at the end of the day. Everybody really goes for his second constellation, and it states that the Autumn Whirlwind field created by his burst has the following effects. It increases Kazuha's own elemental mastery by 200 for its duration. It increases the elemental mastery of the characters that are within the field by 200 as well. The elemental mastery increasing effects of this constellation do not stack, so if you have multiple Kazuhas in a world, you can't basically just stack this buff. The idea, though, that I want to keep in everybody's mind though, is that although this C2 is great because you're not only just increasing the elemental mastery of other characters inside, yes, that's great, but also keep in mind that giving Kazuha more elemental mastery doesn't mean just more reaction damage for him, it actually means more buffing to the characters that he does. Remember that passive talent that Rift was talking about, and the idea of using elemental mastery to turn it into damage bonus for other characters. It's the same thing here. So by increasing his own elemental mastery, he's still actually doing even more buffing as well as a little bit more personal damage. So the C2 is definitely extremely good, but I don't feel like it's vital to any team that Kazuha's in. Honestly, his passive talent should already be a constellation in my personal opinion, just because of how great that is. So I think honestly at C0 he's perfectly fine, but if you do find yourself wanting to get more Kazuhas in the future, I would go ahead and go for the C2.
Well, we hope that this video could help you decide on whether these characters or even the weapons coming up on this next banner are for you.
As always, if you have any suggestions that may help other players, please go ahead and let us know down in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, and check out our Discord as well. Keep in mind also that we do streams at 10 a.m. Eastern time at every Saturday as well, so if you want to go ahead and find us out there, that would show us a lot of love and support as well. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you guys in the next one.